First, we will discuss, as we normally do on this program, and that is the Giants. And for the first time in a while, we're going to discuss something positive that they did. And that was hiring their new general manager on Thursday in Dave Gettleman. And to me, it was the right move. I think that the Giants got this one right. So on Thursday, they hired their former pro personnel director for the last 15 years before he took the Carolina Panthers general manager job in 2013 and then was fired, surprisingly, this past July after their mediocre Super Bowl hangover season. So to me, and a lot of people are going to say this, he's a connection to Jerry Reese. He's going to be a lot like Jerry Reese was. That is further from the truth. If you're not paying attention, go and read some reports, see who this guy is drafted, see how he turned the Panthers around, and then tell me if he was like Jerry Reese. We'll get to that in a second. He said all the right things in his press conference yesterday. I watched it. I thought he handled the media well. I thought he did an amazing job yesterday. He mentioned he was excited. He also mentioned what the New York media is thinking and what the New York fans are thinking, how nobody cares about injuries, how nobody cares if there's drama in the locker room, nobody cares if Eli Apple's arguing with the coaches. We'll get to that later. Nobody cares about who's making the most money. Nobody cares about who had a bad game the week before. The only thing that New York fans care about are wins and losses. And Dave Gettleman addressed that right away and said, this is the big leagues. Nobody in New York cares if there are injuries. Nobody in New York cares who makes the most money. Nobody cares about who's the cancer in the locker room. The only thing that they care about is wins and losses. And Dave Gettleman said that straight out, and he said, we are going to change and we're going to turn this thing around and we're going to do it together. You know, he also said if players get upset with that, too bad. He said all the right things yesterday. He told Giants fans, I'm here to change the culture of this team and I'm here to win. Ralph Acciano of SNY wrote a great article about why he's the right guy for the job, and all of his points I agree with, and he couldn't be more right and really nailed it when it came to this hiring. When you think about it, he's not an extension of Jerry Reese, because if he was, he wouldn't have been successful in Carolina at all. Dave Gettleman got to Carolina. Keep in mind, when he got there, this was a team with a huge salary cap problem, bloated contracts all over the place, turmoil in the organization. The players didn't play for each other. And moral of the story, you know, the Carolina Panthers were really on their way down in a sinking ship before he got there. Dave Gettleman got there, turned the franchise into a team that went to the playoffs 3 of the 4 years he was there, and he did it with cap room to spare. Notable draft picks, Kelvin Benjamin, Shaq Thompson, Devin Funchess. His record in Carolina, 40-23-1. I understand he had a lot of issues with players, and a lot of players notably were praising the Carolina Panthers for firing him in July, Josh Norman being one of them. Him being actually the biggest example out of all of them. As contract negotiations went south, Dave Gettleman didn't want to pay him. He let him walk to Washington. When contract extension talk got heated, he let him go. So the one thing I am curious about, and we're going to get to a lot of other things too, is he's got a lot of issues to address in the Giants organization. Now, this team is a dumpster fire. They have been all year. They were ever since they lost the wild card game to the Green Bay Packers. Actually, maybe the week before that when they went on that boat in Miami 5 days before a 5-degree playoff game at Lambeau Field, but I digress. There's a couple of things here with Dave Gettleman that I'm curious about. A big problem with Carolina was they weren't used to his business style. The Giants are, and especially John Mara, because he was in the organization 15 years before he went to Carolina, and now he's back as their general manager. This was a job he wanted 10 years ago. As one of their pro scout directors or their personnel directors, he deserved a lot more credit for the 2007 and 2011 Super Bowl runs than he actually got. He deserves a lot more credit than what he actually got. Remember that. I'm curious in regards to the Josh Norman incident. I'm curious to see how he handles Odell Beckham next year, because they picked up the 5th year on his contract, so he's not going to be a free agent until after next year is over. And of course, Beckham's going to want a lot of money. He's going to want a lot of years with the Giants, and to me, he hasn't earned any of it yet. Now, obviously, this year, you can state the case that he got hurt early in the year, and it cost him the end of his season. But in the beginning of the season, he was an embarrassment to the organization, doing urinating celebrations in the end zone in a game that they didn't win in Philadelphia. An embarrassment on and off the field. For example, a couple of years ago with Josh Norman in that game against the Carolina Panthers at MetLife, where he actually went and speared him with his head for no reason, just because the two were arguing with each other. You knew right off the bat that Ben McAdoo was afraid of Odell Beckham, and you know Dave Gettleman is not going to put up with his crap this year or next year. When you ask me, did Odell Beckham deserve a big contract extension? No, he doesn't. He deserves an extension. Don't get me wrong, he deserves to be re-signed. I'm not certain I'm ready to franchise tag him just yet. I'm not sure about that. Listen, I understand Beckham is their best player, at least on paper, because the offensive line is a problem. The defense is given up at Eli Apple. Landon Collins, you can actually make a personal statement that he had an okay year this year, and he could probably be a dangerous threat on defense next year. You can make the case for a guy like Sterling Shepard who can have a good year next year. When you think about it with Odell Beckham, he needs to have the best year of his career next year. And he has to stay out of trouble on and off the field so he can make sure that he gets the big contract extension and Dave Gettleman will give it to him. The only time Dave Gettleman really gave somebody a huge contract extension was Cam Newton. He gave him a $100 million contract about a few years ago. In his history, he's not known for giving out big contracts to big players, except really for Cam Newton. He didn't do it with Josh Norman. He let him walk to Washington. Josh Norman really hasn't been that much of a focal point since he got there, so maybe Dave Gettleman won that part of the deal. But I'm curious to see what he does with Beckham next year because he is a free agent. I'm curious to see if he's going to let him walk or he's going to re-sign him for the big bucks. Whether Beckham wants to believe it or not, he did not have a good year this year. I don't think even with the injury, he was going to have that good of a year because of the way the team was going. You had no offensive line to protect Eli Manning. You had a head coach and a general manager that refused to do anything about it. And you had a defense that gave up, I think, the same game that you got hurt. So I didn't really expect Odell to have a good season anyway. I thought he would have a productive season. I thought he could make a run for Pro Bowl voting. I didn't think he was going to have, an all-star caliber season that would have been enough to say, hey, he's got to get the big contract next year. He's got to get tagged next year because he's got so many problems on the field. He has anger issues that if Tom Coughlin were here, he would have kicked him out the door by now because of it. Or at least would have benched him for a few games like he used to. When you think about it that way, number one, Dave Gettleman is not going to be afraid of Odell Beckham Jr. He made it clear in his press conference yesterday that he's not going to let players run the asylum here, and that's the general manager that you need in charge. He's already made that part clear. So he's not going to be afraid of Odell Beckham Jr. If he needs to get in there and say something and he needs to make a disciplinary action for Odell Beckham Jr.'s future actions next year, he's going to. So I'm curious to see what he does there. In regards to the contract extension, I'll tell you what, I'll be paying attention when the season is over next year and we're in 2019 and we get to that. Is he going to re-sign him or not? Gettleman has no ties with Jerry Reese. Now, just because he worked under him and he was with the Giants for 15 years before he went to Carolina, he has a completely different system than Jerry Reese. The championship runs in 2007 and 2011, he should have got more credit for. And I understand. I said it a few weeks ago that the Giants needed to go out and hunt for somebody, that it cannot be a household name. Technically, Dave Gettleman is. But the Giants did get this hire right. This is the guy that you want in charge. And if you watched or you listened to his press conference yesterday, you would know that this is the right guy for the job. He's successful with the Giants and with the Panthers, has a successful track record. He turned a struggling Carolina team around that was next to dead when he got there to a 15-1 season and a Super Bowl against the Denver Broncos. Now, yes, they didn't win, but the way that organization was before he got there versus the end of that Super Bowl, I'm sorry. He did a lot to turn that team around. And if he's given the time and the authority, because he's going to need a little bit of time, he's going to help turn this team around. He's going to help turn them around. There's a lot of issues to address, which is why, John Mara said this yesterday, teams go from worst to first every year. They're not doing that next year. Now, can they make noise next year? I'm not saying they're going to be a playoff team next year, but can they make noise? Sure. If you let Dave Gettleman do his job in free agency and in the draft, which I think John Mara is going to let him do. Here are a few issues he has to address, though. Number one, Eli Manning. He said he's going to talk to Eli. He expects Eli to be the starting quarterback next year, and he also expects to work heavily on the offensive line this offseason. Here's the issue. The Giants will have a top 3 pick next year. Sam Darnold's going to be in the NFL draft. Rosen is most likely going to be in the NFL draft because he's hesitant to declare if he knows that Cleveland's going to take him, which I don't blame him for, to be honest. They're going to go 0-16 tomorrow. The future of Eli Manning, yes, it is up in the air. Now, I understand he said, we're going to work on the offensive line. We're going to turn this thing around. We're going to get Eli Manning some protection. But when you have a top 3 pick, and let's say Rosen and Darnold are still on the board, and you're pick number 3. Chances are one of them will be on the board when the Giants get the pick. Is Dave Gettleman going to sit there and be like, we need to address the offensive line? Or is he going to sit there at 11:59 and say, we need to draft our next franchise quarterback and take Darnold or Rosen? I'm curious what he's going to do on draft night in Dallas. Now, Dave Gettleman is a smart guy. If he knows what's good for him, he will keep Eli for another year. He'll take his chance with Davis Webb, and he'll start working on this offensive line. That's going to be the big thing that he needs to focus on. That's what he has to do to earn the trust of the Giants fans, because Jerry Reese failed to even address the fact that there was an offensive line this year. I don't even know if Jerry Reese knows what an offensive line is. That was the issue with him all along. I think he'll do the right thing. I think he'll draft somebody on the offensive line with his first pick. I think he has to. That's what you need to do at this point. There is no offensive line. Just to quote Sam Flesher again, Eric Flowers at left tackle is a walking human turnstile. I really think that you stay away from the quarterback pick. You take your chance with Davis Webb, at least for right now, as the backup, because Geno's not going to get re-signed. And you run your course with Eli Manning for as long as you can, whether that's only next year or it's a couple of years or it's 3 years, you do that. So then you can take time to develop if Davis Webb is your franchise quarterback. Or you then draft your franchise quarterback like Dallas did with Dak Prescott. You take time to do these things. But the biggest issue as of right now is the offensive line. And if Dave Gettleman is smart, which he is, just look at his track record in Carolina, he will address the offensive line first in free agency and in the draft and in trades if he has to do it. I don't know who he's going to trade away, but if he has to do it, he will make it happen. Now, Beckham's contract situation, as I just mentioned, is going to be a very interesting storyline next offseason. The Giants picked up the 5th year on his contract this year, so he'll play 2018 with the Giants. 2019 is a different story. We saw what happened in Carolina with Josh Norman. Dave Gettleman got ripped for it because of it. Josh Norman hasn't necessarily been that productive in Washington since he got there, though, so maybe Dave Gettleman did the right thing. Will he do the right thing with Odell Beckham Jr.? Now, what the right thing is going to be, we won't know until the end of next year, because he still has one more year to prove himself that he is worth that much money, that he can get wins on the board for the Giants, he can put up big numbers, and he can be a valuable piece of that organization. I understand he's got problems on the field, but at the end of the day, if you can look past that and you can maybe minimize those problems, I know he's a great player. I'm not saying he's not. But the problems on the field is a lot for the Giants to handle. Ben McAdoo was scared of him. That's why he never disciplined him. Tom Coughlin was the only one that had a set of guts with this kid, where he benched him after the Carolina game, where he benched him in Minnesota the next week. Probably should have benched him for the rest of the year. But Tom Coughlin said, "You are not running my team. I am. You're suspended for the crap that you pulled on the field with Josh Norman," because he went out there to hurt him. And this year, you see Beckham whining and crying on the field, and Ben McAdoo has done nothing to discipline the guy. And whoever they bring in as the head coach, and especially Dave Gettleman, I can guarantee you right now, those two are not going to fall for his garbage all next year. And you know what? If he does pull that garbage all next year, he's not worth a contract extension. He's not worth all that money on your hands for God knows how many years. Because he's been an embarrassment to this organization on multiple occasions. And he's going to need a stellar year next year and to keep his nose clean to be even considered for a huge contract extension. I'm sorry. And Dave Gettleman, I'm sure, has already got that plan figured out. The situation with Eli Apple is another one. Suspended tomorrow for a heated argument that he got with his coaches, handling the media poorly, saying grotesque things to the media. Number one, horrific first-round pick to begin with. Number two, according to many players, a cancer in the locker room, the worst teammate that they've ever had. What's funny is, and I don't know if Eli Apple knows this, but he has a clause in his contract that allows the Giants the right to not pay him his guaranteed money for the next 2 years, meaning the Giants could release him after this and not have to pay him. Eli Apple has that clause in his contract. If Dave Gettleman is smart, he'll let the cancer walk and be a cancer somewhere else. Now, when Landon Collins went on the Michael Kay show this past week and said that, originally I was going to come on this show and rip him for it, saying you don't do that to your teammates. Until I heard what he did with the coaches, until I heard how he handled the media this week, until I heard a lot of other players coming out in defense of Landon Collins. And now I don't necessarily have an issue with it anymore. I more now have an issue with Eli Apple and the player that he is. Number one, he's not good anyway. He gave up weeks ago. He basically told Ben McAdoo, I'm here for a paycheck. And Dave Gettleman, I'm sure, will do the right thing with this kid as well. And the right thing is to kick this kid to the curb. He was a horrible first-round pick, obviously, because Jerry Reese drafted him. He's got a clause in his contract where the Giants do not have to pay him his guaranteed money for the next 2 years if he's suspended by the NFL or by the team. So they don't have to pay him his guaranteed money over the next 2 years. They can release him tonight if they really wanted to. They could release him tonight. That would be a huge first statement from Dave Gettleman to say nobody, and I mean nobody, is bigger than their teammates. You treat each other in this locker room with respect. You treat each other like brothers, like family, and if you don't, there's the door. Because we are not going to win when there are quote-unquote cancers in the locker room. So if Dave Gettleman were to release him at season's end, that would be a huge first statement to the players saying, this is my team, my organization. I've been waiting for this for 13 damn years, and if you don't like my business style, there's the door. Because everybody in the front office knows of his business style already because he worked there for 15 years before he went to Carolina in 2013. The young guys may not know his business style. I guarantee they'll get used to it very quickly. He's also going to have his hands full with a new head coach, who they're going to interview, who they're going to hire, and according to John Mara, we can have a decision as early as next week. I don't think Steve Spagnuolo is going to be the guy. Already, with example to the interim GM, they're not going to stick with their interim plan. They're going to go out and get somebody else, and they need to do that. They cannot hire in-house again. Now, we knew when Jerry Reese's job was safe when Tom Coughlin got fired a few years ago that they were hiring Ben McAdoo. They didn't need to make us wait for a couple of weeks. Me and Nick were on this show and said it's going to be Ben McAdoo. Because why else would you keep your general manager if you're going to hire somewhere else? You knew you were going to hire in-house, and you knew it was going to be Ben McAdoo. I don't care who they interviewed. I don't care who they talked to. You knew it was Ben McAdoo. We said it on this show, I believe, January 3rd, 2 years ago, that it was going to be him. When it comes down to it, I think Dave Gettleman was the right guy for the job. I think he has all the will in the world to turn this organization around and make this team better, but he's going to need the time to do it. It's going to be a lot like John Lynch in San Francisco last year. Jed York needs to give him time to develop a team to win. They went out and got Jimmy Garoppolo, and they haven't lost since he started. They have an opportunity to beat the LA Rams tomorrow and get 6 wins. You need to give Dave Gettleman time to develop this organization back to a winning culture, back to a classy organization. He will bring the class back to this organization. And if you disagree with that, and you think he has ties with Jerry Reese, you are sadly mistaken. And if you think he has ties with Jerry Reese, go back to his track record in Carolina and prove me otherwise. Because if he was a Jerry Reese puppet in Carolina, they wouldn't have done anything. They would have wasted Cam Newton's prime, and Josh Norman probably would have walked years before he did. Ron Rivera would have been fired in a year. You need to give Dave Gettleman time to develop the team. It's not going to happen overnight. And yeah, I know what you're going to say. I said the same thing about the Rams last year. Well, you know what? This is a much, much different situation because the Rams had talent. They had a talented defense. The problem was they were on the field 98% of the season, so they were gassed out by week 7. And they had a tougher schedule. Give this guy time to develop the team, get an offensive line together, get some defensive players in the secondary that won't quit by week 2 at halftime, and let Dave Gettleman be the unsung hero of the New York Giants, because I feel that if he's got time and he's got ownership on his side, which he does according to Steve Tisch and John Mara, he is going to bring back a winning culture to the Giants. I don't know when, but it's going to be sooner than you think, as long as you give him time, patience, and the authority to turn this program around.